I've spent a lot of time watching people throw around terms like reference class and biamped without ever really saying if those monitors will actually help you hear what matters in a real mix. If you're on the fence about spending a good chunk of your budget on a pair of studio monitors, this is the kind of rundown that will help you judge real value, real use, and whether the Neumann KH120 MKII actually fits your workflow. The link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about the decision point that lands most people in the maybe zone. Do you need a monitor that can double as a near-field reference in a modest room? Or are you looking for something you'll push in a larger space with a lot of acoustic treatment? The KH120 MKII sits squarely in the sweet spot for small to medium home studios. Think a bedroom or a compact project room that's been treated with some absorption panels. Its 5.25-inch woofer paired with a 1-inch tweeter, driven by a dedicated DSP engine, means it can deliver a surprisingly tight, detailed low-mid response without the bass boom that often forces you to add a subwoofer. In my own testing with a typical 12-foot room, the monitors sat on the Auray IPS isolation pads, included in the bundle, and gave enough bottom end to make a 60 Hz kick drum audible, but without muddying the mix. If you're running a larger space, however, you'll quickly notice the limits. The bass will start to roll off and you'll have to rely on room correction or an auxiliary sub to get the full picture. Who should buy the KH120 MKII? The sweet spot user is a producer or engineer who works primarily in the 20 Hz 20 kHz band, but whose mixes don't need the extreme low-frequency punch of a 7-inch or 8-inch monitor. Think of someone mixing pop, rock, electronic, or film scores where clarity on the mids and highs is critical. The biamp architecture, where the woofer and tweeter have separate amplification paths, really shines when you're tracking vocals or acoustic instruments. Those subtle transients get presented clearly, and it's easier to decide where a cymbal's wash ends and the snare's attack begins. The included MA1 alignment mic is a nice bonus for calibrating the monitors to your listening position, which can shave minutes off your setup time if you've already done a basic room analysis. On the flip side, skip these if you're a bass-heavy producer who spends most of the day working on hip-hop or EDM tracks with sub-frequencies that go down to 30 Hz and below. While the MMD Waveguide helps keep the high-frequency dispersion even across the sweet spot, the physical size of the woofer just isn't built to push the deep lows you'd expect to feel rather than just hear. For those users, a larger cone monitor or a dedicated subwoofer will be a better investment. Also, if you're planning to use the monitors in a near-field setting but you have a very reflective room, lots of glass, hard floors, minimal treatment, the KH120 MKII can sound sharper than it should. Those reflections will make the high end feel inflated, and you'll end up compensating incorrectly in your mixes. Now onto everyday usability. The monitors themselves have a clean, minimal design in anthracite, which means they blend into most studio aesthetics without drawing attention away from the gear you're actually focusing on. The built-in DSP is not just a buzzword, it offers a simple onboard EQ that lets you adjust the low-frequency roll-off to match your room's response curve. I tried the low-cut setting at the 80 Hz mark when the monitors were placed right against a wall. This reduced the audible boom without sacrificing the definition that the woofer normally provides. The controls are tactile and obvious, so you don't need to dig through a software UI every time you move the monitors. One practical strength that often gets overlooked in generic reviews is the way the isolation pads perform in a live mix scenario. The Auray IPS pads have a low-profile rubber base that decouples the monitor from desk vibrations, which is especially noticeable when you have a heavy DAW computer or a subwoofer sharing the same desk surface. In my setup, the pads prevented the typical rattling you hear when you hit a hard-hitting drum break, keeping the high-frequency detail clean. It's a subtle difference, but after a few hours of mixing, you'll appreciate that your ears aren't being forced to work through unwanted resonances. A hidden trade-off comes from the compact chassis. The back panel is fairly tight, and while the 5-meter power cable is included, the unit doesn't have the kind of expansion ports you'd find on larger monitors. No side-mount inputs, no built-in room correction beyond the DSP presets. If you're hoping to connect external processors or plan to daisy-chain multiple monitors in a surround configuration, you'll find the KH120 MKII a bit limiting. The bottom line is you get a focused, transparent signal path, but you sacrifice some flexibility for that purity. Let's talk price-to performance. In the studio monitor market, Neumann sits next to brands like Genelec and Focal.